Hello, everybody. My task here is to provide you with facts about Syria and the Syrian crisis. After those images, it's kind of hard to remain like neutral about these things, but I'll do my best. First of all, I would like to thank you, Agape Caritas, for inviting me to participate at this event. I think it's a really good thing what they're doing to try to raise awareness about the plight in Syria and the plight of Syrian people. Given the brief nature of the talk, I will focus on a number of aspects that I believe explain why finding a solution to the Syrian crisis has been especially hard. This is a really big map. I imagine that all of you are familiar with the fact that Syria has an extremely heterogeneous society. Perhaps less of you know how religious and ethnic groups are distributed within the country. So this map will explain to us this. Let's begin with religious affiliations. The majority of Syrians, over 70%, are Sunni Muslims, here in light blue. There are also followers of three other Muslim sects: Alawites, over 10% of the population, in dark green; Druze, in purple; and Ismailis. Finally, there are also some Christian denominations as well, and you can see them in red at the bottom of the map. As for ethnic differences, Syrians are overwhelmingly Arabs. The Kurds represent the largest ethnic linguistic minority, around 7 and 10% of the population. And you can see them in the yellow areas at the top of the map. Now, if we look at the current partition of the country, it is easy to notice how it reflects these ethno-linguistic and religious divisions. The Islamic State, in light red, controls areas inhabited mostly by Sunnis. The Islamic State is mostly a Sunni organization. The Assad government, in light blue, controls areas inhabited mostly by Alawites and other minorities. President Assad is an Alawite. Kurdish forces, in green, control areas inhabited by Kurds. And finally, the other rebel forces, mostly Sunni forces, here in yellow, control areas inhabited mostly by Kurds. So what does it mean? These two maps, they tell us that religious and ethnic differences, affiliations, have played an important role in shaping the Syrian conflict. However, it is extremely important to remember that they are not the only factor shaping the conflict. The Syrian conflict remains a classic example of a struggle for power. So how did this conflict start? Here there are a few important dates and events at the beginning of the conflict. On March 18th, 2011, the first major demonstrations took place in the cities of Daraa and Banyas. In both cases, protesters were sparked by specific local grievances that soon turned to wider national issues, such as the Assad regime's corruption or unaccountability. In Daraa, in particular, people took to the street to protest the arrest and the torture by authorities of a dozen teenagers guilty of scrolling graffiti reading, "The people want the fall of the regime." The authorities responded with violence, with lethal force. 6 people were killed, many others were injured, and scores were arrested. The Syrian uprising had just begun. the government's violent response to the uprising progressively but steadily transformed an initially peaceful uprising into a full-fledged armed conflict. On the military front, by September 2011, the newly formed Free Syrian Army reportedly engaged in its first military confrontation against the government forces near the city of Rastan. On the political front, a month later, in October 2011, the opposition announced the formation of the Syrian National Council. The goal of the Syrian National Council was to give a common name and a common address to this heterogeneous array of anti-Assad forces. The idea was that in this way they would have been more able to receive foreign support in terms of humanitarian aid, but also weapons and other goods. Neither attempt at unifying the Syrian opposition, either politically or militarily, could be considered a success. In fact, up to the present day, the Syrian opposition remains deeply divided. According to US official sources, by 2014, there were around 1,500 distinct groups fighting in Syria. That's 1,500. Among these, extremist groups, such as the Nusra Front or the Islamic State, have gained considerable prominence. Today, the Syrian conflict can be described as a combination of three distinct but overlapping wars. At the top of the table here, we see a civil war that pits the Syrian government against the rebels, broadly defined. Then we have a sectarian war at the bottom left corner that pits Sunni forces against Shia forces. At the bottom right corner, we have a proxy war that pits US and Gulf proxies against Russian, Iranian, and Hezbollah's proxies. However, this situation is more complex than the table shows. In fact, there are significant divisions among each side, and we'll try to talk about some of them. For example, the United States and Turkey, they maintain two opposite views about the Kurdish rebels. Turkey perceives the Kurds as a serious threat to its national security. Therefore, Turkey opposes the Kurds. At the same time, the United States cooperates and supports the Kurds because they see the Kurds as one of the most combat-effective rebel forces. Another good example exists in the context of the sectarian war between Shia and Sunni forces. Here we have Sunni rebels fighting against a Sunni organization, the Islamic State. But also, we have clashes between Sunni Kurds and other Sunni rebel groups. So any kind of representation like this is necessarily a simplification of an otherwise much more complex situation. Since the beginning of the uprising in March 2011, there have been at least 3 major rounds of peace talks. The first one, referred to as the Geneva one, was held in 2012. The second one, Geneva II, took place in 2014, and the current round of talks started last February, so February 2016. Well, there are at least three major problems with finding a solution to this crisis, and they explain, in part, why these talks, these negotiations, have failed to provide an end to the conflict. First of all, not all parties have been invited to the Geneva talks. The major opposition bloc is the Saudi-backed High Negotiations Committee. The HNC does not include groups such as the Nusra Front and the Islamic State. Moreover, the HNC excludes all the major Kurdish groups. Why is that important? Well, as I showed you before, these groups play a major role in the conflict, and we don't have to forget that they control de facto large areas of the country. Therefore, any kind of negotiated agreement that does not include their agendas, does not include their interests, is going to be partial and weak. Second, different views among foreign actors exist, especially in terms of the future of Bashar al-Assad. On the one hand, we have the United States, the Gulf states, and Turkey that have long called on Assad to go. On the other, we have Iran and Russia that have made clear that Assad departure is not a prerequisite to peace. The final obstacle, one of the many, but one of the major ones, is that even in the event, unlikely event, of an agreement among these different foreign actors with different agendas, we cannot take for granted that local actors will accept it and we will then implement it. So to sum up, because I'm running out of time, the Syrian conflict can be simultaneously described as a civil war, a sectarian war, and a proxy war. However, any of these kind of categorizations is a simplification. We have, given the large number of actors, their somewhat conflicting agendas, I'm sorry to say that I don't see a durable solution anytime soon. Thank you.